Excellent, and we are live. Well, sorry. Okay, there you go. I think something. All right, we are live. Can you hear me okay, Megan?
Yes. Trying again.
I think we might have maybe two browsers open, browser tabs or something like that. All right. So while we are figuring that out, I have the distinct pleasure of hosting Megan today on this fireside chat. Usually it's Dharmesh who hosts these events, and it's a discussion around sales ops, our favorite topic, and so I'm very excited to do this today, and welcome Megan to the fireside chat. Megan works for MongoDB, and so we'll start off with a quick introduction to her background and her history with MongoDB, and especially her career in sales ops. And I think it's a great way to kind of introduce her, and then we'll dive into some topics. And the topic for today is scaling a sales ops function, and especially with a hyper growth company like MongoDB has been. What are the challenges, opportunities, etc. So we'll explore some of those topics in the discussion today. So with that, Megan, would love to hear your background and just introduce us to how you came to be in sales ops and in MongoDB.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Sorry about the echo issue. I'm glad we got it working now. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been at MongoDB for over 10 years. I joined when the company was really small. There were less than 10 people. So I've been at the company for the whole journey. And when I joined, I was sort of in like a catch-all role. I was the first non-engineering hire. And over time, I became more and more focused on marketing, specifically develop marketing to our audience of software developers. And I had the chance to build out the developer relations, the demand generation, and the field marketing teams. And then about 3 years ago, I was trying to decide what was next in my career. And I had a conversation with the CEO and the CRO at the time who said, if you want to be a COO or even a CEO, you really understand marketing, but you have to understand sales. And so they suggested that running sales ops would be a really good way for me to do that. And it definitely has been. And, I did have some background from having run demand gen around the demand to close and the funnel optimization and things like that. But, when I took on the role, I hadn't ever seen a comp plan or a comp model before, or any of those other aspects of sales operations. So it's been a really fun problem to work on.
Right. And so you, less than 10 people, that's amazing. So it must have been a really interesting experience seeing the company grow the way it has, and all of the challenges with scaling marketing and sales, especially. That's awesome. So I know I've had the pleasure of working with parts of your team, and I really admire the collection of people that you have put together in that team, and a really amazing team. And as I said, it's probably the envy of a lot of sales ops leaders out there. So as you kind of got into this role and started building out the team, I'd love to hear your perspective on kind of what are the types of hires and the aptitudes and sort of the main problem areas that you have to hire to scale, and how do you build a team like yours? Like, how do you get there?
Sure. So I guess a few thoughts. One is, so when I took over the team 3 years ago, it was very small. It was one analyst, We had Jason, who runs our systems team, and I think he had two or three people on his team. So it was pretty lean. I think now we're at about 29 people in the sales ops org, so much bigger. And in that period, we started to specialize quite a bit more. So the systems team specialized into a support function and a Salesforce admin function. The analytics team has now specialized into a territory management team and a core analytics team. And I would say every 6 months or so, we have a QBR among the sales ops team. And one of the things that each leader does is present the org chart of the future. So what do we think we're going to need in 6 to 12 months? So we can start planning and career pathing for the people within the team. And then in terms of recruiting and hiring, one of the things that we do across MongoDB, sales and in other parts of the company as well, is we ask people to do a challenge or do a practical exercise as part of the interview process. So for a Salesforce admin, it might be, a test, design a solution around opportunity management. For the analytical roles, we'll give them a sample data set and say, hey, help us analyze the productivity of this cohort of sales reps. What are your observations? And it really gives us a chance to see how people think and just, learn a little bit more about what it would be like to work with those people. So I've had a lot of success bringing people on board that way. An example, actually, this is an example from when I was running demand generation. We did a challenge. So that's a marketing role. So I would give them a white paper and I would say, hey, turn this white paper into a series of emails and a series of social media posts. And I had somebody in the pipeline who I was like, it kind of had an unusual background. He was a technical recruiter, but we gave him the challenge and he knocked the challenge out of the park because he really understood the audience and the persona. So I think doing those kinds of practical problems during the interview process really helps you surface talent that maybe you wouldn't have identified in other scenarios.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So you talked about the systems team. You talked about the sort of analytics and strategy kind of team. Does enablement also fall under your purview? Sales enablement and performance measurement, management, etc.
Sales enablement is a separate team within MongoDB, and sales enablement. I think one of the interesting things about MongoDB is we've invested quite a bit in sales enablement as well. MongoDB is a pretty technical product, so understanding the technology is a big part of a rep's success at MongoDB. So investment in enablement has been pretty critical, and we also have tooling around sales enablement. So we use tools like Chorus.ai to record and transcribe calls. We use MindTickle to develop online courses and HighSpot to curate content for the sales reps.
And does your team manage those systems for the enablement team, or do they manage those on their own?
For the most part, the enablement team manages them on their own because they really know what the requirements are. So they tend to work more directly with the vendors. But the other vendors in our tech stack, we manage much more closely with the jobs.
Okay, now I think 29 people is a sizable team, and in terms of kind of the level of investment that you ought to think about from a sales ops perspective, right? And covering both the areas that you mentioned as well as enablement. It's always an interesting debate that I see with sales ops leaders is how much of your sales budget should be focused on ops versus revenue generating resources on the street. How do you approach that problem at Mongo, and what's sort of the philosophy around how much investment do you put into these support functions to sort of enable sales versus the actual sales resources? How do you make that investment decision?
It's a great question, and I think sales operations is often seen as a pure cost center, and it can be difficult for sales ops leaders to get budget. I've seen some benchmarks from Gartner and others of anywhere between like 3 to 7% of the overall budget going to sales ops. I mean, I think there's different ways to get creative. So I can describe a few things that we've done at MongoDB. One would be trying to tie our work back to the productivity of the sales team. So, we can get incremental productivity by adding more quota carrying reps, obviously. But if we can increase productivity by X% by giving the sales team better tools, better visibility, better metrics, better territories, that's a very high leverage activity. So a really good example for us is territory management, which is something we've been working with Fullcast very closely with. So MongoDB's has a pretty interesting go-to-market approach. So we have an open source database that anybody can download and use for free, or you can sign up for our cloud product, again, for free. So we have this massive community of developers that we can go and upsell to our either our enterprise edition or our paid cloud version. And that creates kind of a bit of a champagne problem in that we have all of these accounts we could go after. And we try to focus the reps on what we call smoke, as in when there's smoke, there's fire, and get them to all the reps we follow a named account approach across the entire Salesforce. So getting the managers to make sure they're focusing the reps on the right accounts, we think could really unlock productivity. So at the end of last year, we put together a business case saying, if we using our analytical skills, saying we think we were able to sort of say we model how much incremental productivity we think we can get by focusing reps on the right accounts, and then we made an investment in building out a dedicated territory management function. The other thing in terms of resourcing I can speak to that we've done is specializing. So, when I joined, we had the systems team. We're kind of doing a mix of like, hey, responding to inquiries from the field, as well as building new systems and new functionality within our tool set. So we broke that team out into two. So now we have an associate team, which is kind of like a farm team for the rest of sales ops, and they respond to all of the inbound inquiries from the sales team. And that team is based in India, so we have sort of like a lower cost function. And then the Salesforce admin team works more on the projects. And then even some of these, another sort of benefit again of Fullcast has been like a lot of the requests or the cases that we get from the field are around moving accounts around, and our team typically has to do a bunch of spot checking, like, hey, okay, you want to move this account? Have you considered that these subsidiaries are actually assigned out to other reps? In Fullcast, we're able to allow the managers to do those changes on their own. So that automation is also helping us.
Right. No, that model definitely is something that I've used as well. When I was at Salesforce, we built out a team in Costa Rica, and they responded to, and believe it or not, at 4,500 reps, we used to respond to about 25,000 tickets a year. And just in terms of account moves, subsidiaries, data quality, territory changes, role changes, like all of these moves are changes that are sort of continuous. And what we realized was that the territories, as we defined them at the beginning of the year, 30% of them look nothing like what we designed them. Because of all of these changes, and we sort of implemented a very similar model to what you're describing to sort of deal with that scale. The challenge for us was, before I did that change at Salesforce, we were hiring people in San Francisco with San Francisco wages to kind of deal with it, and budgets being flat, that's always a challenging way to kind of scale your team. And you talked a little bit about kind of automation, and I think in terms of scaling a sales ops team, sales ops function. That is a critical sort of thought process in terms of what you automate first, right? I mean, clearly there are deal desk type scenarios that you can automate. Clearly there's CPQ is one thing that sort of comes up really at the beginning of the scaling sort of curve. So how did you sort of think through that aspect of, where do we invest the money in terms of automation that can sort of help scale the support function, make it easy for the sales leaders and sales managers to kind of, because ideally you want that case avoidance, right? You don't want the case in the first place. You want them to self-service. You want them to sort of be flexible on their own. So can you talk through sort of, the investment in automation and kind of what sort of thought process goes into that?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of an endless number of things you could think about automating. And I guess I tend to sort of think about it like working backwards, like what do we want to accomplish? What do we want to track? How do we want to run the business? And then walk backwards into what can we automate to accomplish that? So like a good example is we use these dashboards that we call metrics for success dashboards, and they're meant to help us coach reps on pipeline generation and track the activity and the number of meetings that they're having, and track their what we call qualified pipeline, which is pipeline once it's reached a certain stage in our process, we consider it qualified. So, we knew that this was going to be sort of a key way that we were going to measure and coach reps. So we're like, this is something where we need to start building some automation. So for example, we're using a tool called Sales Director that sucks in the reps' calendars and pulls in all the meetings. They still have to classify the meetings. So there is sort of a last mile element to it. But because we knew that this is such an important process for us to be able to coach them and make them better, that this was really important to automate. Similarly, I think about anything related to funnel tracking. Like, you want to invest more in marketing, you want more marketing dollars. Well, you have to have the funnel tracking and automation in place in order to do that. So, that's sort of where, unfortunately, I think one of the challenges with the sales ops is anything that helps the sales ops team kind of ends up on the back burner. So, that's why I was really excited to get a tool like Fullcast, because again, it would enable more of our sales leaders to self-serve around territory management, especially given the scale that we're at and the amount of territory changes that we're making.
Right. No, that makes sense. I think we hear the talking to a lot of customers in sort of that initial stages of scaling. We see that challenge of saying, do you really need a tool here? Could you just hire one more person and put some more elbow grease and get it done right on an Excel spreadsheet? And that only goes so far. In terms of being efficient, and then you get into this problem where the sales ops team is not looked upon by the field as an enabler, but more as a stumbling block, right, to get to what. So it'd be we reach success in spite of the sales ops function. That's always that interesting challenge of kind of where do you invest and how do you enable that scale to happen, and we see a lot of our customers and prospects when we go through that conversation with them, struggling with that question. Is this something that I need to do in order to provide scale? Could we just not hire another analyst and give them a bunch of spreadsheets to go work through? And while it seems like a quick solution, it really kind of, I think, curtails the ability of the team and the flexibility in the team. So it's interesting to kind of hear your thought process around that. And of course, critical in all of this is the relationship that a sales ops team builds with the sales management function, right? And really kind of that I think is one of the most crucial relationships that will enable this to be successful. And one of the challenges in that whole realm is how much flexibility do you give sales managers in terms of the process, in terms of what changes they could make. So I've always sort of looked at this challenge of, do you optimize for the process and simplicity of the process for the sales ops team? Because then you could be more efficient with the sales ops function. But what that invariably does is it curtails the flexibility that a sales manager has on the field, right, in order to deal with whatever the market is throwing at them. And I've always erred towards enabling the sales function to be more flexible, even though life may be a little bit more difficult for the ops function in the back office, right? Can you just expand on that and that challenge? And I know that while we were working with you, the sales manager feedback was one of the critical things that I think you put a lot of emphasis on. So I'd like to sort of hear your thoughts on how you manage that relationship.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about MongoDB, even though it may make my life as a sales ops person more challenging, is we try to make decisions based on what's the right thing for the company and the customers, not based on the limitations of our tooling. Right. So that often does end up meaning that, we have to build processes that are maybe, can sometimes feel like Band-Aids or very bespoke processes that may be difficult to automate. I mean, some of the, what you're talking about, what you said about earlier about sort of scaling a team and what to automate, some of the things that we do, because they're kind of custom to MongoDB, like I think, for example, how we calculate quotas is maybe a little different from a lot of other companies. And it does require a certain amount of judgment to understand the organization and the accounts and the things that they're targeting. So that's the kind of thing where, maybe we are living in Excel and with extra analyst headcount versus trying to automate that particular piece of the puzzle. So I think it, especially if your company is taking that approach, which I think is the right thing to do, which is, it can put a little bit of an extra burden on the ops team, which I think is the right thing.
It is the right thing ultimately. And I think, one of the interesting perspectives that I learned during my career in sales ops is, really successful sales leaders look at that flexibility as a competitive advantage, right? The ability for a sales team to respond to the market. I mean, COVID is a great example of where everything just, anything that you planned just went out the window, and you really have to kind of, re-strategize really quickly. And that flexibility, I think, is important for sales organizations to respond to the market. And if, as a sales ops team, I think it's our responsibility to sort of provide them the tools to be able to do that. More often than not, I've seen, especially in larger companies at scale, you would have these rules that you can't change territories, you can't change accounts, you can't change roles until you've been there for 6 months or 8 months or whatever the rule sets are, because they're really optimizing for the sales operations function as opposed to really supporting the sales organization, right? So that's always an interesting sort of back and forth that I see in a lot of sales organizations. We talked about kind of sales ops up until this point, but one of the big shifts in the industry, of course, is this role around revenue operations, where it's not just about the sales function, bringing in your background as well in marketing and customer success, sort of coming together in terms of a revenue function, as it may. Is that transformation occurring within Mongo, and how do you guys think about that? And how do you as a sales ops person prepare for something like that? And how does that play out in especially in Mongo's history?
Sure, it's a good question. I've done some research and talked to some folks on revenue ops, and I think there's pros and cons to a rev ops model. I think one of the big pros is, I think, when you have everybody working together in one team, obviously you have efficiencies. I also think there's a really great case around career paths, right? Like your career path can be across sales, marketing, customer success, operations, right, within one team. And I also get the sense that it's really good, especially if you're sort of starting from scratch, right? If you're an earlier stage startup, Like, maybe you don't need a sales ops, a marketing ops, and a customer success ops person. You can kind of fold it onto one team. Now, I think the drawbacks are, one of the things I like about our approach, the quote unquote siloed approach. Maybe we can come up with a
specialized approach.
Specialized approach. So, I report to the CRO. So, at the end of the day, I have the company's best interest in mind, but like I'm thinking like the sales team, and I'm representing the sales team. And I think that's a benefit. I also think it enables us to move more quickly. So centralized groups can become overly bureaucratic and move slowly, especially when you get to a certain amount of scale. So there is kind of like, pros and cons. Now, that said, I feel like because we have the distributed approach, there are times where I'm like, oh my gosh, we're doing one thing here and marketing ops is doing something kind of similar. Like we should be collaborating more. But on the other hand, I have a different set of timelines. I'm like, if I got to move and get something done, I am sort of empowered to do that. So that's sort of my thinking on it. I don't know that there's a right answer, but
no, there isn't. It's always interesting to hear different perspectives. And I think one of the things that we've heard is, especially with the cloud subscription model, a sale is just the right to make money. It's not, you haven't made the money yet, right? And so customer success becomes a really important function in revenue generation, which sort of traditionally has been the realm of sales. And so even to sort of continue to make sure that the customer stays, retains, upsells, and all of those kinds of things, we see that function kind of play out between customer success and sales. And that's kind of where we've seen people head towards that pattern. And I think for Mongo, it's kind of an interesting setup because you guys have both the community free edition and all of those kinds of stuff, and then you also have a subscription model, right? And so I think I can sort of understand, how that might impact the way that these functions would work, and a specialized approach would probably be the right setup in that case. But yeah, no, it's always an interesting sort of looking back at subscription-based businesses. There's sort of this rapid movement towards kind of like this revenue ops kind of model, because you really need to tightly work with sales and customer success in order to make that happen. Traditional sort of sales, we've got companies that are non-software based, and we don't see that movement as much. Switching topics a little bit, kind of you've been in both these roles in marketing and sales. What is that interaction between marketing and sales like? I know that there is, definitely a lot of automation that exists on the marketing front that sort of pumps all kinds of stuff into the CRM, and then your sales teams are sort of picking that up and running with it. How do you manage that relationship between sort of marketing and sales?
Sure, it's another good question that I'm often asked. That's one of my sort of key focuses over the past few quarters has been to spend more time thinking about how we can optimize our demand that we're generating within marketing into business within sales. And it's it's interesting given the commentary you made about RevOps and about the move towards CSM. I mean, the other interesting thing about MongoDB is that, we have 3 distinct channels. Though I say distinct, they're actually not that distinct. And that's kind of the interesting thing. We have a self-serve channel, so anybody can develop or can swipe a credit card and start using MongoDB. And that's all sort of driven by marketing programs. And then we have a high velocity inside sales team, more junior reps closing on the phone. And then we have your sort of traditional field sales team. But more and more, that self-serve channel is driving our sales success. So the interlock with marketing becomes increasingly important. So we have a cross-functional group that meets biweekly, actually, across marketing ops, sales ops, the SDR team, and sales. There's sort of ongoing collaboration. And like I said, this is sort of one of my bigger focuses, is to see how we can start to improve some of our conversion rates for marketing.
Right. And how much of the investment that goes into marketing impacts sales ops, and the investment that goes into sales ops? Like,
Yeah.
I know one of the challenges that a lot of companies deal with is in marketing, just even a simple thing as a marketing form to fill out. Well, you want to put as little information in that as possible, which is sort of diametrically opposed to, well, I got to take this account, place it, and take it through the funnel, and as you said, identify the smoke, in a sense, right? You can't do that unless if you have hundreds and hundreds of Gmail addresses on your lead forms coming in, right? And so how do you think about the investments that goes into both these functions? Is clearly the once those Gmail leads are in the system, I think the sales ops function has to figure out how to identify the smoke and how to enrich the data and how to figure that out, right? So what's kind of some of the strategies and things that you've employed in that front?
So it's funny you brought up the forms, because that's actually been a big pain point for us. So I mentioned we have this self-serve funnel, and one of the ways I want to say it was a year or two ago, we did an experiment to shorten that form significantly, which drove tons of top of funnel registrations for our cloud product. But we took out the company name, and this wreaked havoc on all of our our ability to identify what company these people are from, especially because, like you said, many people, developers, they often sign up for things with their Gmail address. Now we're in a COVID world, people are working from home, so IP enrichment is sort of pointless right now. So that's definitely been a challenge. We sort of went back and forth, and we since added that field as optional back on those forms. And we're doing an audit with the India team that we talked about, that's going through and trying to reconcile some of that data. But I mean, having come from marketing, at least I can understand and empathize with sort of the thought process. Like, there are always trade-offs. Like, sales is always going to want more. Marketing is always going to want less, and to want to be able to sort of nurture the lead till they're further down the funnel. Like that's just it's a natural tension, and it's sort of about finding the right compromises in those scenarios. Did you have a second part of that question, or did I answer it just with my
I think you answered it. I think you answered it. I think one of the sort of follow on to that is we find in a lot of organizations, just in terms of that scaling, the first thing you put stuff into is your marketing automation, right? You want to as much top of the funnel activity as you can generate. So what we see is, in a lot of organizations, that has happened earlier in this scaling cycle. So you got a Marketo or an Eloqua or something like that is going in place. That's sort of generating a lot of top of the funnel activity. And then you sort of start to see the challenges that sales ops team are facing, along the lines of the forms and the minimum details, is a lot of data quality challenges, right? So when you get into the CRM, of course, you have all these information that you can't identify the company, you can't identify, where they're coming from, what country, as you said, IP addresses are all over the place right now, and being even able to say, okay, this lead came from, this country or this state or whatever the case is, that's getting harder to do, which means that the sales ops teams are kind of left with a lot of data quality challenges that they have to deal with to get the right people on the right resources and so on. It's definitely a natural challenge. It's definitely something that from an investment standpoint. But what I find is a lot of teams struggling to make the case that investments going in marketing ought to have some investment on the back end, in the back office, to be able to handle the leads that are generated, and because just throwing all that leads in front of a salesperson is not the most effective way of dealing with it, right? Because then you're wasting really highly specialized resources on data quality work, which is not what you want to do. So that sort of investment challenge is also something that I don't think a lot of teams think about when they put a lot of automation on the front end. just in terms of how much crap that it generates in the back end, right?
Right.
To deal with.
Yeah, you need a combination of sales and marketing enrichment tools. So, my observation is that the marketing focuses maybe a little more on the people, whereas sales, we tend to think more in accounts. Yeah. So we're looking at account data, things like Inside View or DataFox or these other providers. And then, I mentioned we like to do everything in unique ways at MongoDB. So we're also using LinkedIn Talent Insights, which is it's actually a tool for recruiters, but we use it to help identify where people have MongoDB skills. And then we enrich our account data with that information. And then we use a combination, and we automate as much as we can, match as much as we can, and then we use the India team to sort of get to that do the last mile in terms of enrichment.
Right. And you guys are obviously on Salesforce, and Jason's team does a great job of kind of managing that as from a systems standpoint. What are some of the kind of tool investment that you have made on top of kind of a CRM to really enable the efficiency of a sales ops function, or even supporting the sales management team in a sense? I know that there's a lot of people build custom solutions, custom code, and a lot of automation on top of Salesforce to deal with what I would call sales policy related things like holdouts, or who can do what, or who can create leads and all of that kind of assignments and routing, and there's specialized tools for each one of those. So one of the key challenges for, I think, sales ops leaders as they're thinking about scaling this is very quickly, if you focus in on kind of that point solutions for each one of the problems as you're encountering them. So sort of like the next stop sign, and then you put a solution in for that, and then there's another one. But if you step back and you look at the investments that you're making there, you really very quickly get to that tool fatigue. You really get to that point where integration between all of these tools become challenging because they're sort of not designed the same way, or not following the best practices the same way. How do you and Jason kind of think about that problem? Just kind of this explosion of tools. Salesforce makes it really easy for us to install a tool and put a process in place that may not scale, right? And I think one of the refreshing things about you and Jason is that you guys think about that problem before putting a solution in, and you really kind of analyze the scaling of a point solution or a point problem that you're addressing today, but how does this scale in the future? Just kind of would love to understand the philosophy and the thought process that you guys follow. I know sometimes you just have to have a quick solution, a quick fix to get around the immediate need, but in terms of thinking about it for scale on top of Salesforce.
Yeah, I mean, I think it always starts with what is the problem you're trying to solve? What are the requirements that you need? I get prospected a lot, right? This is where, I think if you read Serious Decisions, or any of those analysts, right? It's like there's so much information available online that it tends to be, I'm like the stereotypical person, like I've done a lot of the research on the tools. So when people are prospecting into me, I'm like, we've already thought about that or that. But I guess my point is that, it starts with the problems that you're trying to solve and your requirements for those problems. That has, in my opinion, I think led to us having tool fatigue like every other company, it seems. So, we have a problem. We try to fix that particular problem based on our requirements. But I do think the next phase for MongoDB is to start thinking about these things more holistically. A lot of the vendors that we work with have overlapping functionality. Like I can give you an example. I mentioned that we use Sales Director to suck in email and calendar and automatically attach contacts to opportunities and automatically log meetings. Well, Chorus.ai records and transcribes calls. They've got similar functionality to suck in email. Avisa, which we use for forecasting, also sucks in meetings and calls, but for their particular use case, which is around giving a predictive forecast. So I think one of the challenges is that each of these vendors kind of solves these problems for their particular
Angle.
Particular piece of the puzzle. And it can be difficult to get to avoid, the tool fatigue in those scenarios. I don't have a perfect solution. Another good example is, like I mentioned, MindTickle and HighSpot. I had someone ask me, like, well, why do we have both these tools? I'm like, well, they do different things. HighSpot curates content, and MindTickle is more of like a learning tool, right? An LMS. So it's difficult to, to avoid, like when you have all these challenges and gaps to fill, it's difficult to avoid ending up with so many vendors.
With the myriad of, I mean, I think one of the challenges is, you want to solve the problem quickly and put a solution in place. And of course, the tools are also evolving in terms of their surface area. So when you brought in one of the tools, they may not have had that functionality, but have since, brought that on and whatnot. So I think one of the challenges that I see is a lot of systems teams, similar to Jason's team, dealing with kind of a myriad of tools, is that you sort of become a human system integrator in a sense. And what I mean by that is you're sort of, uploading and downloading data between different systems. You're integrating it manually. The IT teams have sort of given up and said, no, we can't. We're not going to spend time investing in integration, or the integration is just not available. And so what I find is a lot of it's low value work in terms of a sales ops function, but you have to do it to get these tools to work. And really, there's a lot of investment going in terms of people to do this manual integration between tools and sort of resolve the architectural conflicts between, how one tool thinks about account hierarchy and how another tool thinks about account hierarchy and so on. So this is a sort of a very common use that we see, that I think it's on us as vendors to make sure that we are sort of addressing that problem. But certainly the industry is struggling with just having an explosion of tools that don't always work well together. And in my opinion, Salesforce isn't helping provide some guidance around that to sort of help with that problem, which is always an interesting challenge, I think, as we talk to sales teams. We talked about sales leaders and sales leadership and kind of that relationship with sales ops. You obviously have a global team, a global sales function. What are sort of some of the strategies that you've used as a sales ops function, which typically tends to be centralized, and decision making around that seems to be centralized. And there's always this natural tension with the regions and the sales leaders in the regions with, specific challenges that they face. Can you share some examples of that and how you guys have sort of made sure that you're supporting the regions just as much as people at HQ?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a challenge, and it's something we're actually thinking about organizationally right now, like how much of our team should be sort of a centralized group of a centralized team with a lot of specialization, functional specialization, versus putting more generalists out aligned to sales leaders, right? Because do we have more of a centralized model or like a field ops type of model? And it's something we're thinking about. We have a little bit of it within our territory management teams. I mentioned we built this territory management function. That was a combination of investment in tools like Fullcast, more staffing in India to manage data, as well as analysts in the field to partner with the sales leaders on helping them think more strategically about how to build territories for their reps and use data to do that. So that's sort of like our, the first step into that more of a field ops kind of model. But I think that's something, I think I mentioned that we have this every 6 months or so, we get together as a leadership team to think through the org chart of the future. And that's one of the things that's on the agenda for me is as we scale sales ops, like how much regionalized support are we able to give? And I think also, as you mentioned hierarchies, right? Like at this point, MongoDB, we have reps and first line manager, second line manager, third line manager. We have multiple layers. Like another question for me is like, how much can we really support? Like At the rep level, probably not a ton. At the first line manager level, it's probably mostly canned reports, right? Like that's the report you get. You're not getting a whole lot of bespoke stuff. And then maybe, at the second and third line manager level, we're able to give a little bit more of a custom support. So starting to think through some of those things so we can set expectations appropriately.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think that I've seen organizations sort of swing back and forth between those two models in terms of investment, and that's always interesting to see. Well, this has been fantastic, and we're at time, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you and sort of discussing some of the challenges I know a lot of our audience kind of thinks about, and so I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Any final parting words?
No, I really appreciate you having me. It's always fun to talk about these topics. So thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And stay safe out there.
Bye.
Bye now.